Ladies and gentlemen, you're welcome to another tutorial on how to create derby patterns. These are some of the tools that we are going to use. So let's get right into the proceedings this evening. So as you know, the first thing we do is to generate our center line. I've explained in several different videos on how that is done. Now I'm calculating my standard last length. On this last, you can see it is 30 cm. So the center line, I mark a few points on the forepart of the last, cut out a straight line upon which I have drawn on a piece of masking tape and connect the dots. And voila, I have my main axis, also known as center line, in front of the last. I do something similar at the back, and I have my main axis at the back. Remember that the standard last length which we calculated was 30 cm. It will come in handy shortly. Right now we find the ball of the last on both the inside and the outside part of the last, otherwise known as the medial and lateral side. We connect those two ball points to generate our vamp line, and the point where the vamp line intersects with the center line is called the vamp point. Remember, our standard last length was 30 cm. If we divide that by 5, it will give us 6. And that is the height of our counterpoint, measuring from the hillside of the back center line. If we add 1 cm to the counterpoint, that will give us 7 cm, and that shall be the height of our back height. So counterpoint, back height. Now the vamp line on the lateral side, we will divide into 2. Dividing that into 2, we measure it first. I think it came to 8.5 cm on this last. Dividing it into 2, we will get 4.25 cm. So we measure 4.25 cm from the vamp point and mark that position. Next, we are going to draw a line from our counterpoint to that middle point on the outside vamp line to generate our waterline. So we have our center line, we have our vamp point, we have our counterpoint and back height. We found our waterline. Next, let's get our instep. The instep is 25% of our standard last length. 25% of 30 will give us 7.5, so we mark 7.5 from our vamp point. So that's our instep. Now we're done with calculations, so let's remove all of those. So from our back height, we will draw a line to the point where our waterline is generated from. We draw it, and then we'll draw a right angle. Then we measure our waterline, divide it into 2, and then draw a line from the instep to that middle point on the waterline. That will give us the 2 lines which we can curve to generate the top line of our shoe. So watch how I curve these 2 lines to generate the top line. Just a simple matter of curving it like so, and you have your top line. Now in designing this derby, I would have to curve in some parts of the facing. I usually like to start about 1 cm from the vamp line, away from the vamp line, draw 90 degrees from that 1 cm position down towards the feather edge, draw another 90 degrees from the instep down towards the feather edge, And then if the first 90 degrees line that I drew from that 1 cm position away from the vamp line, if I extend it just about half a centimeter from the quarter line where it intersects with the quarter line, I can now curve to the place where the 90 degrees line drawn from the instep meets to get the quarter of the shoe. It's a simple matter. So right now, all I need to do is to fine-tune my facings and quarters, and you can see that I already have the outline of my derby. I'll add the tongue as you see. Draw the inside part of the tongue. Remember, it's a derby. The tongue is on the inside and it forms part of the vamp. Just draw it in like so, and my derby is complete. I want this derby to be a capto derby, so I draw in the capto. Having done that, next thing I'll have to do is to cut out my last copies, and from there generate my mean forms. So you can see really that designing a derby is not really rocket science. Anyone can do it. If it looked a little bit too fast paced for you, you can, re-watch the video, but I think it is self-explanatory. So I cut out the medial side of my last copy, cutting a few notches at the heel and at the toe area to allow it lie flat, and then flatten it in such a way that I don't have any major rumples sticking out. I do the same for the lateral side of my last copy, cut a few notches at the heel and the toe area, and then lie it flat, ensuring that I maintain approximately the same standard last length that I had on the last. So I paste in my last copies on a flat piece of cardboard. The next thing to be done will be to cut them out on this cardboard and use them to generate my mean forms. If you're interested in a more detailed description of how mean forms are generated, check the link at the top right hand corner of this video for an in-depth discussion on mean forms, why they are important, and why you should always use them in your pattern making. So right now I cut out my medial side last copy, cut out all the notches that indicate the instep, the counterpoint, and of course I had earlier cut out the vamp point notch. Now I'm going to flip this medial side last copy, flip it over. You see those points where I cut the notches, and flip it over, trace out this last copy indicating all of those cardinal points. Next thing to be done is I'll take the lateral side of the last copy, place it matching counterpoint to counterpoint, vamp point to vamp point, and then tracing out. Next thing to be done is to find the difference between the inside and the outside part, then cut along the line of those differences to generate my mean form for this last. So ladies and gentlemen, here I am cutting out my mean form. Having cut out my mean form, next thing to be done will be to transfer the design that I had on the lateral side to the mean form, and then use that to design my derby. But before I start designing in full, I would also have to do another step called springing the vamp. So let's first of all trace out all of the design lines. So I'll trace out all the design lines, cut out my tracing channels, and then spring the vamp. That's how it's going to progress. So we're still tracing out. There it is, a simple classic derby. Right now let's cut our tracing channels. Explaining what tracing channels are is somewhat difficult, but it's really a simple process. It's just a matter of cutting notches on your design lines, not all the way through along every length of the design line, but at different places, such that you can put in a pen or a pencil to be able to retrace those design lines on another piece of paper or material that is placed underneath. Right now I'm opening up all of those design lines with an awl so that my pen will find it easy to go in and trace. Now it's time for us to spring the vamp. I'm going to use the simple method of springing vamps. So I divide my vamp line into two, almost sever it into two but not quite. Then draw a straight line, straight horizontal line, and then fold, rotate my mean form along the pivot of the joint of the vamp line to align it to that straight line. Now the entire pattern is on a straight horizontal axis. Having done this, I will check again to see that my standard last length corresponds to what I originally had even after springing the vamp. So let's check that. You see there, it is still 30 cm. Correct. Excellent. We are on the right path. So all that remains to be done is to cut out the different aspects, the different parts of this pattern, add my lasting allowances, folding allowances, and of course my stitching allowances, and this pattern would have been complete. So that's my toe cap right there. I've added 1.5 cm of lasting allowance. So let's cut out the rest of the vamp. You see how I'm placing my pen within the tracing channel to trace out the different design lines on this pattern. So this is a derby. I mentioned to you earlier that the tongue forms part of the vamp. Now, because the quarter is going to be sitting on the vamp, I'll add stitching allowances on this wing part of the vamp. Add stitching allowances on the part on which the toe cap will sit. Then I would also add the traditional 1.5 cm of lasting allowance. That's what I'm marking out right now. I would also add that, and then this pattern piece would have been complete. We cut it out, and that is it for this piece. Of course, we will match it to the toe cap to see that everything lies flush, fine and dandy, just to double check. So we add the toe cap, everything lies fine. So the quarters is all that remains. I'm not going to cut two different quarters. This is a derby. I could easily flip one quarter the other way around to generate the other side. So let me first of all add my eyelets. I draw a 1 cm line away from the edge of the quarter, add about 1.2 cm spaced eyelets, and then punch the eyelet holes. So let's cut out the quarter. So trace out the facings, trace out the quarter. I'm going to add folding allowances on the top line and also around the quarter area. So let me quickly just add that folding allowance here. There it is. Add about 1 cm of folding allowance around the top line and around the facing. Add my 1.5 cm of lasting allowance. And then I will cut out this pattern piece and it will be as good as done. The only other pattern piece remaining is the flap at the back that I use in securing the back. I'm not sure I'll bother you with that. Cut a few notches to recognize where the actual folding allowance starts and ends. And there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. Also cut tracing channels along the folding allowance area. I would also punch out, of course, my eyelets. And there we have it. The quarter is done. So let's match everything together. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. This pattern is as good as done. So we trace it out on leather, and that will be the end of our pattern making process. Next thing I'm going to talk to you about is how to close up this derby. So we'll talk about a few tips with stitching, talk about a few tips with folding the folding allowances, and then if we have the time we may talk about how to last it up. So ladies and gentlemen, that has been the class for today. If you like content like this, subscribe to the channel, invite your friends to like and share this video as well, and then click the notification button so that you are alerted each time we have new content, which we regularly do. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a lovely day and God bless you immensely.